Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm covering part 4 of Gardens of the Moon, titled Assassins. Really excited to bring you yet another video. We are slowly but surely chugging along in Gardens of the Moon at this point. Really getting down to the end here shortly, and things are definitely ramping up. And before I get started, I will just say, based on everything I heard, I knew my reread, I was going to appreciate Gardens of the Moon more on my reread, but I honestly was not expecting to enjoy the reread this much. I was someone who, I really enjoyed my first read through of Gardens of the Moon, but I was also very much lost, which kind of prompted this whole series really on my reread. But I'm someone who's okay with being lost. But you do definitely get a much better appreciation and understanding, obviously, on the reread. So I just have been really enjoying it. You pick up on so much more. And honestly, it feels like every time I turn the camera off, I'm like, oh, I should have said, I could have talked more about this, could have talked more about that, which kind of prompted, if you noticed, since my last official, where I covered part 3, I did release two additional videos, one on Jagged Tyrants, which really seemed to be the where we're headed as far as the major conflict goes. And then also I just wanted to cover, because it was really a good point, we were halfway through Gardens of the Moon, so I also released kind of my a video where I covered the major players and kind of the faction, how the different factions are developing. Obviously, Ericsson's characters are so complex. So if you haven't checked out those two videos, I would highly recommend it. I think it just gives more perspective. And like I said, it's Gardens of the Moon and Malazan in general is so dense that it feels like that you just can't cover everything, even in like 5 videos per part. I wouldn't be able to touch it all. So go check those out if you haven't. That is the last video, obviously, is why I busted the whiteboard out, which was something different and new, which I really enjoyed. I hope you guys did too. So yeah, if you're continuing to like the videos and liking the series and want to see more to come, please let me know down below. And then like and subscribe too, because that helps me out as well. But all right, let's actually jump into what happened. And we get a lot, and like I said, we're kind of past the setup point, and we're really dealing with pivotal events of the story, is what I would say. So in the last part, we saw one of the major things that happened was Tattersail, the confrontation between Tattersail and Beladrin on the plains, where she obviously sacrifices herself, opens her warren in the presence of Tlan, which is an Elder Warren, and that kind of consumes both her, Beladrin, and Nightchill in like this column of flame. And then it was made very obvious that something similar happened to her and Beladrin, or to Tattersail, that happened to what they did with Hairlock. So we really were... I was curious because I'd kind of forgotten how this storyline developed, how that was going to resolve. And right away, thankfully, which doesn't happen too often most of the time in Malazan. Usually you got to wait a little bit to see a resolution occur. But right at the start of this part, we get a very interesting scene with Kruppa, one of the fan favorites. I love him. I think most people love him, but I can see how some people could maybe, and there might be a world where you might find him annoying, but we get a dream, which obviously we know are very important because the Elder God Cruel uses him to kind of advance, it would seem, his plots potentially in the mortal realm. So, and it comes out right and says it. So in this dream, we have a meeting with a Tlan, not a Mas at this time. So we know this is probably a very, the time frames are, it's not happening in the present day necessarily. So we get Pranchol, who is a Tlan, later obviously will become a T'lani Mas. And then we have this pregnant Rivi woman, and obviously Kruppa, and comes right out and says it, that Krepa represents the present, the Rivi woman represents the future, and then obviously the Tlan Pran Chol represents the past. And I think it's Krul who just comes out and says that. And then we also get an explanation as to why Krul uses these Krepa's dreams, and it's because we find out that Krepa is immune from younger gods' manipulation, which makes it a perfect kind of meeting place for kind of what the elder god Krul, it would seem, wants to accomplish. So we get a little insight as to how these dreams kind of came about and why they're being used the way they are. So very interesting. And in this meeting, we see Tattersail. They have a plan. Obviously, her soul is extremely traumatized, and we know how it drove Hairlock, insane. So they have this plan using the Tlan, who's a mage of his day, and the Rivi woman who's pregnant. They seemingly shift the soul from Nightchill's remains into this pregnant Rivi woman, and then she gives birth. And it's described this child will be like nothing like anyone has ever seen. So it's going to be very interesting to keep our eye on that. It's noteworthy, I believe, too, in the section when the Rivi woman gives birth. The moon is directly overhead, so there may be something significant about that as well. We'll kind of wait and see how that develops. So yeah, just really interesting, kind of a nice resolution to what kind of happened to Tattersail. Obviously, she sacrificed herself to kind of prevent the Taishran and the Adjunct's plan to awaken this Jagat tyrant, who we know, based on everything we've heard so far, is a pretty bad news if he were to if the Jagat tyrant was to awaken. So that was nice, something to keep our eye on. And then also something I found interesting too is the Tlan Pran Chol says, I wish I could, be here in 20 years to see her as an adult, as a grown child. And Krepa says, basically, you will see her as an adult. It won't be for 20 years, though. It'll be as a Tlani Mas Bonecaster in 300,000 years. So that's really cool. We'll have to wait and see if Pran Chol makes, any appearances as a Tlani Mas in future books or later in this book. But yeah, I thought that was a really, really great start to the part. Just a nice, quick kind of resolution to the little story arc for Tattersail. Just really, really, the part got off to a very good start, in my opinion. So yeah, that was Krepa's dream. And then we also see here, we get a conversation with Crocus and his uncle Mamet. And I just want to quickly pull that up because I think it's noteworthy as well here in the actual text, where we get further explanation of Jagat tyrants. And like I said earlier, I would definitely recommend checking my video out on Jagat tyrants that was released about a week ago at this point. But it's basically explaining this, that Darujistan was born on a rumor. And Mamet explains to, let me see if I can't find it. But Mamet explains to Crocus that the whole reason why Darujistan was developed, why it's even here in the first place, is this idea that the Jagat imprisoned the Jagat tyrant, which we saw a reference to in the last part. They imprisoned him and put him in a barrow. And that kind of idea and rumor, because we know Jagats are so powerful, it attracted huge amounts of people, almost like the California Gold Rush is what I immediately jumped to. For basically, like, grave robbers were searching for this Jagged Tyrant's tomb, obviously in hopes to pillage it or reveal some, like, ancient, hugely powerful artifact. And in this conversation, obviously, we know Erikson doesn't come right out and say, tell us. There's no info dumping as to, like, the history of the world or anything. So whenever we get little tidbits of that, I like to highlight it. So we get a little tiny bit of insight into the previous races before humans, these ancient races before humans kind of came about here. So this is Mamet talking to Crocus. It says, in the early cycles in this realm, 3 great people struggled for dominion, none of them human as we would know human. Bowing out early in the struggle were the Folkroll Sail, or the Crusail as they are now known, not through weakness, but, disinterest. So that's all we get on the Folkroll Sail. And it's just interesting that, like, they kind of just bowed out because they couldn't be bothered, it would seem. So that's just a unique insight, I think, into that race, and we'll have to make note of that, mental note of that, if we see anything additional from them in the future. And it goes on to say, the remaining 2 peoples warred endlessly. We know from what we saw in the last part, this is obviously in reference to the Talani Mas and the Jagat. Eventually one fell, for they were a race of individuals, battling as much among themselves as among their racial enemies. They were called the Jagat, though the term has degenerated these days to Jag or Shurl. While losers in the war, they did not disappear entirely. It's said some Jagat survived to this day, though thankfully not on Genebacus. So we can tell, based on this, that the Jagat are extremely powerful and feared, it would seem, even today, even though they're almost like a myth at this point. People very much still fear them. And then we know, obviously, Tattersail, the whole reason she sacrificed herself was when she found out about this Jagged Tyrant that they're seemingly trying to awaken, and that was her effort to kind of throw a wrench into that plan. So just very interesting, and I thought it was noteworthy just because we get so little, not so little, we actually get quite a lot, but not all at one time. So whenever we get these little tidbits, we want to make note of them, because I know on my first read through, I probably just glanced over that, didn't think anything of it, just like continued reading, barely made note of it, I'm sure. So yeah, I just thought it was worth pointing out. And then continuing on in the part here, we see a conversation between Whiskey Jack and Sari, which I also thought was important because it reminds us that Sari's got a lot going on internally, actually. And so far, she's almost been solely depicted as acting as the patron of assassins. But we do have to remember she has the old witch sorceress with her, way back at the start of the book, if we remember. She had kept souls in these 6 candles, and then she had the talent of prophecy, it would seem, based on what she said to Sari right before she died, and seemingly maybe did a little hairlock Tattersail type situation into Sari, who at the time was this young fisher girl. So we are reminded when Whiskey Jack is talking to Sari and mentions seer, and it kind of like jars Sari for a minute, which is important because it kind of shows like she is, the rope hasn't entirely taken over. It's maybe, 99% there, but definitely not. There's an inner conflict going on that Erikson is subtly reminding us on. So this was also, I found, an interesting section here because it kind of speaks to what's going on with Sari and her character as a whole. She's not entirely this cold-blooded killer, although she very much is that at times. So this says, which had been triggered by a single word uttered by Sergeant Whiskey Jack, seer. And this obviously must have reminded her subconscious of that old woman when she was just a young child. It goes on to say, it had felt as if a dark, compacted thing in her brain had burst open with that word, and now warred against all that surrounded it. Though it had initially come upon her with a force that seemed almost overwhelming, she could now sense its waning. Whatever it thought was winning the battle, yet faintly, she thought she could hear the weeping of a child. So obviously, that would actually be the child Sari was before she was possessed by this god of assassins. And it goes on to say, I am Cotillion, she heard herself murmur, patron of assassins, known to all as the Rope of Shadow. The weeping grew fainter, the seer is dead, she says. So we can see, obviously, the god within her, not surprisingly, is fairly easily able to push down, her own soul, that of, kind of this young, innocent person and child whose innocence got ripped away by this god of assassins, and then also of the seer, who obviously had the talent of prophecy, who's that ancient woman that was so cruelly, just killed offhandedly by the guard that was passing. So yeah, that was, I thought, worth mentioning, because it just, all of these characters are so complex, which is what I obviously love about Erickson's writing, that you constantly kind of have to be keeping tabs on, or at least making mental notes of what these little tiny insights we get, because these characters are so rich and complex. Even one like Sari, who when I first read the book, I don't think, once again, I caught any of that. I just viewed her as like, okay, she's this cold-blooded killer, and that's pretty much all she is. But obviously there's a lot more going on there, as we are coming to expect with Erickson's writing. So we see Sari. She follows Kruppa to the Phoenix Inn, and we're reminded that she's, Cotillion is fully in control as the patron of assassins, because she just kills the guard, or not the guard, but like the security guard almost, on duty at the Phoenix Inn, just for making an offhand remark that she found offensive, which it was offensive, but probably didn't deserve a knife in the eye, if we're being fair. So she follows Kruppa into the Phoenix Inn, and we get another interesting scene between the bartender, Crocus, and Sari. They're all conversing. Crocus notices the blood on her dagger, so he now knows she's the person. And then we also get, he's the coin bearer, and we see he goes to pay for his drink, and the spinning coin tumbles out. So whenever that happens, we know Open's involved somehow, and we come to find out that Sari was planning on killing Crocus, because Crocus was Open's pawn, and obviously Shadow Throne, Cotillion, the patron of assassins, are kind of scheming against Open, so they're trying to limit Open's influence. But I think, anyways, my interpretation of it was she's kind of entranced by the spinning coin, and for some reason she makes the decision, and we're reminded a couple times throughout the part that she was planning on killing him, but for whatever reason she's not going to kill him anymore. So that may have been Open's influence, which can be very subtle, it would appear. So anyways, that was my interpretation of that. Let me know if you guys agree with that, or if you notice that in your read through of this section. And then we also get a conversation at the Phoenix Inn still with Murillo, Cole, and Kruppa. Cole obviously is turned into a drunkard because his wife cheated on him and left, but he says something very profound. He mentions, he looks like Kruppa dead in the eyes and mentions 5 black dragons. Kruppa, this like really takes Kruppa back. So we later see Kruppa going through old texts at Mammoth's place and finds reference to these 5 black dragons, who we find out are Tistandi. Not surprisingly, we know Animander Rake was here. Moonspawn is directly hovering overhead. So this kind of just reaffirms that the Tistandi are probably going to play a fairly pivotal part in what's to come here in Darujhistan. We also get Quick Ben's conversation with Shadow Throne, which was really interesting. So much happens in this part, and that's why it's so hard to cover everything in just one video. So Quick Ben is conversing with Shadow Throne, and he says, I'm an acolyte, but there's, your house, basically, the House of Shadow, is trying to, has marked me for execution because I was a follower, but, I turned away from Shadow. And he comes right out and says that, but he says, if you remove this mark of execution from me, I will deliver you the person who mortally wounded one of your Hounds of Shadow. And Shadow Throne, kind of agrees to it, but he doesn't realize who he's actually speaking with. So at the very end, he calls Quick Ben by his name and screams, kind of he's been fooled, but they've already made this pact, it would seem. So we know that Quick Ben can kind of remove this mark of execution from Shadow if he delivers Hairlock to Shadow Throne. And then Callum and Quick Ben, after that occurs, we find out kind of mysteriously, we haven't obviously heard or learned a lot about this yet, but Quick Ben wasn't just an acolyte as he appeared originally to describe himself to Shadow Throne, but he was actually a high priest of Shadow, and that's why Shadow Throne knew him by name and was so upset with him when he recognized him finally. So I found that very, very interesting. And there's so much depth and so much background information to all these characters that we're slowly finding out about, which I just love. I love the little tidbits, not being told outright, here's the full history of Quick Ben and why he is the way he is. I describe it, I was telling my friend about Malazan, and if you've ever played the Dark Souls series, which actually has really rich and detailed, deep storylines, but they don't tell you anything. It's all through item descriptions and a few voice lines when you're facing certain bosses. So I describe it like that. You're getting these tiny tidbits of information, but it's all coming together to paint this great epic story and these really in-depth, rich, detailed characters, and everything's so mysterious it makes you want to keep reading. So just another reason why I'm enjoying my Gardens of the Moon reread way more than I thought I would. I knew I'd like it, but I didn't know I'd love it this much. It feels like a brand new book, at least for Gardens of the Moon. I don't think all the books are gonna feel that way, but because you're so out of your depth on your first reread or on your first read through at Gardens of the Moon, you're not acclimated to Erickson's writing at all, and you're not familiar with any of the characters, that at least Gardens of the Moon has felt was this really the book I read when I started this whole series way back in the day? So yeah, I've been loving it. And then finally, the part concludes. We obviously know why it's titled Assassins, and that's because Callum follows Rallic Nam to this meeting with the Guild of Assassins, and Rallic Nam knows he's being followed by Callum. Callum knows Rallic Nam knows he's following him, but that's just kind of how it's done. It's described as, to arrange these meetings among assassins. And it seems, at least based on what we find out from Animander Rake, was that the Malazan's plan was to actually hire the Assassin Guild to eliminate the council or the leaders in the city, kind of cause mass chaos, and that way the Malazan Empire can kind of just swoop in, take over the city very smoothly. And obviously Animander Rake is trying to resist this Malazan invasion. So when at this meeting, a third party comes into play, and this is where the 5 black dragons, reference comes in. We see the Tist Andi, who send their own assassins to intercept this meeting, and they eliminate a large, if not all, of the members of the guild other than Ralik Nam, it would seem. And there's this huge battle between Quick Ben, who is very powerful. If we weren't aware of that already, we know for sure now, because he definitely holds his own against the Tist Andi, who we have to remember are these ancient immortal beings. So it was a really epic scene, and at the end, Quick Ben is a little bit out of his depth, so he releases one of Tayshren's demons to defend him and distract the Tist Andi. And we get this cool scene where the demon Pearl is saying, is released and says like, "Oh, Quick Ben, do you pity these, creatures that I'm about to kill for you?" And Quick Ben says, no. And then as he's about to turn away to engage in combat, we get Animander Rake coming down, and he's described as carrying, he's a dark, shadowy figure carrying a long silver blade. And as Quick Ben and Pearl see the blade on his back, Pearl, says, "You've sent me to my death. Do you pity me?" And Quick Ben says yes. So we get this ominous reference to Animander Rake's weapon, which is it's just cool. His sword. And then the part ends with who was it? Yes, it was Cruel and Kruppa. Once again, they have a conversation, and there's this Kruppa hears in the distance, kind of right after this has occurred, the creaking of wagons and chains and slaves, and Cruel says, "That's Dragnapur. It's actually a sword, Animander Rake's sword." And so it's just really, really cool. It seems to imprison the souls of anything he slays. So it's just as if Animander Rake wasn't already epic and cool enough. He also has this this incredibly awesome weapon. And then also of note too, during this conversation, Kruppa asks, can any soul resist and kind of break out, essentially, is what he asked of the Elder God. And he said, this may be important. Originally, when it was first forged, absolutely not, but he's unsure whether that's still the case. And that's where we're left off, kind of on this ominous note. So yeah, that's all. I hope you guys are enjoying the videos as much as I'm enjoying making them. Definitely expect to see part 5 and part 6, and then I think we'll be done with Gardens of the Moon, which is really exciting, kind of the first leg of this journey. Oh, there's actually 7 books, so we got 3 more major videos covering the remaining 3 parts. And then we'll be done. I'll plan on done at least with part 1, book 1 of 10, of course. And after I finish Gardens of the Moon, I plan on doing a review of the book as a whole, giving my thoughts,